r/NoSleep. I'm the night watchman at an abandoned Irish manor. Around Halloween, the shadows start whispering. The manor's silhouette loomed over the countryside, its crumbling turrets and ivy-choked walls darkened against a cloud-strewn sky. I'm the night watchman, Declan O'Shea, tasked with guarding O'Connell Manor, a place that's seen more sorrow than any one soul should bear. They say the house died when Lady Eleanor perished. They say her spirit's trapped here. The locals, the smart ones, never come by. But during Halloween week, curiosity sparks like tinder, and it's my job to make sure nobody gets hurt, or worse. The last train to the village had long passed, leaving silence so thick it settled in my bones. I trudged through the winding halls, flashlight cutting through the dark, its beam catching crumbling portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me. The air carried a damp chill that sank through my jacket. Somewhere far off, a creak echoed, a sound that wasn't mine. "Great," I muttered, tightening my grip on the flashlight. A draft sighed through the hallway, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender, Lady Eleanor's favorite. My skin prickled as memories of whispered village stories came to mind, Lady Eleanor's tragic end, her betrayal, the sorrow that claimed her life in a locked room nobody had seen opened in decades. Then came a sound that made my breath catch, footsteps. Not the hesitant steps of someone sneaking in but the deliberate click of heeled shoes. I turned, the beam of my light scattering across the ornate carpet and up to a tall mirror at the end of the hall. Fog crept over its glass, forming words so jagged they seemed scratched by claws. "Help me." "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice ricocheting down the hallway. The reply was silence, save for the mournful wail of the wind. I stepped closer to the mirror. My pulse roared in my ears, but I steadied myself, ready for a prankster or a stray animal. The mirror fogged up again, this time showing something else, a shadow not my own, its arms long and thin, fingers like blackened tree branches reaching out. The hair on my neck stood as the scent of lavender grew suffocatingly sweet. I spun around, expecting to find the hallway empty, but there she stood, Lady Eleanor, her gown tattered, eyes hollow voids, and mouth locked in a silent scream. She was less a person than a portrait of grief come to life. You're not real," I whispered, stepping back until my spine met the cold glass of the mirror. She raised a translucent hand and pointed to the grand ballroom at the end of the hall. The doors, once grandiose and imposing, now hung ajar, spilling faint candlelight and the sound of muffled voices. "Help me," her voice finally came, a distant echo as if spoken through centuries. Drawn by some compulsion I couldn't shake, I found my feet carrying me down the hall and through the ballroom's double doors. Inside, the grand room was preserved in an eerie snapshot of its former splendor, gilded chandeliers, long tables set with fine silverware, and figures seated all around, their heads slumped and bodies draped in decaying finery. As I took a shaky step inside, the candles flared, illuminating faces that should have long turned to dust. Lady Eleanor's gaze caught mine from across the room. Her expression was one of unbearable pain. "He betrayed me," her voice rasped, coming from every direction. The figures at the table stirred, heads lolling upright, hollow eyes fixed on me. "Who betrayed you?" I managed to choke out, every part of me begging to flee. "Lord O'Connell," she said, pointing to the head of the table where a figure sat, his posture rigid, a goblet frozen mid-air. His face, pale and twisted in a mask of fury, began to melt, black ichor oozing from his eyes and mouth. The room erupted with sound, chairs scraping, silverware clattering, as the specters began to rise, their whispering voices merging into a symphony of rage. The door behind me slammed shut, trapping me inside. "Please, let me help," I begged, holding up my hands. The only response was Lady Eleanor's gaze, softening as if she'd finally been heard. "Release us," she said. Her form flickered, waning like a dying flame. Instinct took over. I grabbed the nearest candelabrum and, with trembling hands, hurled it at the grand portrait of Lord O'Connell that loomed over the room. Flames licked at the canvas, devouring the face that had caused so much torment. The specters froze. Their eyes turned skyward as their outlines wavered and began to dissipate. Lady Eleanor stepped toward me, her form now radiant and peaceful. The room's tension eased as the spirits released mournful, relieved sighs. "Thank you," she whispered, a smile breaking through her sorrow as she faded into soft, glowing embers. The fire sputtered out, leaving the room as dark and lifeless as before. Silence returned, broken only by the distant wind. The door creaked open, no longer locked, and I stumbled out, the echo of her voice trailing behind, "Be at peace, Declan." As I walked back into the night, The weight on my chest lifted, the Manor's whispered stories finally put to rest, at least for now. As I walked back into the night, the weight on my chest lifted, the Manor's whispered stories finally put to rest, or so I thought. But something wasn't right. As the chill of night closed around me, I noticed the shadows stretching longer, clawing at my heels like tendrils refusing to let go. The air grew thick, each breath harder to draw as though something unseen was pressing down. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I halted and looked back at the Manor, now a dark silhouette, its windows like hollow eyes staring into me. Then I heard it, a soft, dragging sound coming from the darkness behind me. I spun around, squinting into the shadows, gripping the flashlight as if it were my only lifeline. Nothing moved, but the sound persisted, a scrape, 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 as if something were being dragged across the ground. My heart hammered, and the world seemed to close in. I turned and kept walking, faster this time, feeling the shadows closing in. But the night wasn't silent anymore. Voices, whispers, filled the air, each one familiar, each one echoing the same plea, "Declan, come back." I knew better than to heed them, yet my legs slowed, my feet betraying my own instincts. I felt pulled, irresistibly drawn back toward the Manor, though every rational part of me screamed to keep moving forward. And then, just as I forced my feet to move again, a searing coldness shot through my chest, as if an icy hand had reached in and grabbed my heart. Gasping, I stumbled, clutching at my chest. I could see my breath fogging, and the lavender scent thickened, cloying, suffocating. The voices grew louder, insistent. "Declan, help us. You freed her. But what about us?" Fear constricted my throat as I realized what I had forgotten, the other spirits, the ones at the table. They were still bound, still trapped in that eternal, agonizing night. I hadn't freed them, I'd only freed Lady Eleanor. Her suffering might have ended, but the rest were left in torment. Suddenly, a fierce wind rose, tearing through the trees and whipping around me like a cyclone. I stumbled and fell, the flashlight slipping from my grip and clattering onto the ground. In its dim beam, I saw them, figures shrouded in mist, faces twisted in anguish, reaching out with clawed, skeletal fingers. "Help us. Declan. You freed her. Why not us?" Their words burned in my mind, each one a lash of guilt. I scrambled backward, feeling for the flashlight, desperate to shine light on the horrors inching closer. The largest shadow stepped forward, a man in decaying finery, his face scunt, his eye sockets hollow but burning with furious light. He towered over me, his voice filling the air with a cold, damning judgment. "You think you can simply leave us? Do you think releasing her is enough?" I stammered, words caught in my throat. I didn't know. I didn't mean to." "You broke the curse for one," he hissed, his breath like 1,000 frigid knives, "but we are bound by blood, by death, by the betrayal of this place. Until all who suffered here are avenged, none of us will find peace." A cruel smile split his face, and he extended a skeletal hand toward me. "You owe us, Declan. You are bound to us now, by duty, by your promise." He reached out, his fingers curling around my wrist, his touch burning like ice. A vision seized me, of the grand ballroom, of those once opulent chandeliers gleaming, of laughter and music filling the air. Then, of horror, a great betrayal, a massacre as Lady Eleanor and the guests had been poisoned, their lives drained by the very one meant to cherish them. The images of those deaths, violent and unforgiving, flooded my mind. I gasped, my own pain nothing compared to the agony that had been seared into the Manor's walls. "Do you see now, Declan?" the spirit whispered. "You must avenge us. Return to the Manor. Complete what you started, or we will haunt you. Wherever you go." He released me, and I fell back, gasping. The spirits lingered, their eyes piercing, condemning, until the wind carried them away like smoke. When I finally forced myself to my feet, my legs were trembling. I could have run, left that forsaken Manor and its cursed spirits to fade, to rot in the past. But they wouldn't let me go. I'd seen too much. There would be no freedom, no rest, until I avenged them, broke the curse once and for all. With a mixture of dread and determination, I turned back to the Manor, retracing my steps as the wind whispered around me. When I reached the front door, it creaked open on its own, inviting me back inside. The shadows stretched out like welcoming arms, and somewhere deep within the walls, the faint strains of a violin began to play, as though the dead were preparing for one last performance. The Manor's great hall lay before me, and I felt its dark history pulse like a heartbeat. I made my way to the grand staircase, feeling the air thicken, sensing the spirits closing in, waiting, watching. I knew what I had to do. I had to confront the source, the room where Lady Eleanor had been betrayed, where all the suffering had started. I reached the door at the top of the stairs, the locked room nobody had opened in decades. The wood was rotted, the handle rusted, yet when I touched it, it swung open, revealing a chamber shrouded in shadows. A figure sat slumped in a chair by the window, his face turned away, but the air was charged with an unspeakable malice. I stepped forward, heart pounding, and the figure stirred, his head twisting to face me. It was Lord O'Connell, or what remained of him, his skin gray and stretched tight, his eyes hollow and sunken, yet filled with an unnatural, mocking light. "Welcome back," he rasped, a smile creeping across his desiccated lips. "Did you think setting her free would break my hold? She was nothing more than a pawn." "You betrayed them," I said, my voice trembling with rage and fear. "Betrayal is such a strong word," he chuckled, leaning forward. "I gave them what they deserved. They worshipped her beauty, her grace. It was my manor, my legacy, and I would not be overshadowed." As his words dripped with venom, the air grew colder, and the spirits began to materialize around him, the guests, the servants, all those he'd condemned. They glared at him with hollow eyes, their hatred seething. I didn't need any more confirmation. I grabbed a decayed torch from the wall and struck a match, lighting it. "It's time for you to pay," I said, my voice steady with a conviction I hadn't felt before. I thrust the torch toward the brittle curtains, and flames began to spread, licking at the old wooden tapestries. Lord O'Connell's scream echoed as the fire engulfed him, his once mighty figure crumbling into ash. Around me, the spirits watched, their twisted forms relaxing as they faded, one by one, released from his grip. The flames roared, consuming the room, spreading down the halls. I ran, the inferno raging behind me, the manor finally meeting its end in a blaze of righteous fury. Outside, I turned back, watching as O'Connell Manor burned, its silhouette crackling and collapsing into embers. The screams of Lord O'Connell were swallowed by the fire, and as the last walls crumbled, an eerie silence fell. In the quiet that followed, I felt a profound calm settle over the countryside. The weight was gone, the spirits released, their stories laid to rest. As I walked away from the ruins, the first light of dawn broke over the hills, casting a golden glow on the ashes. And in that light, I could have sworn I saw Lady Eleanor's face, serene and free, her spirit finally at peace. I left the ashes behind, knowing the manor would trouble no one again. The shadows had whispered their last,